Welcome to Second Saturday Conversation. Here we explore Christianity in and for the 21st century. Both are problematic and for many reasons, but I think notably because we are in a period of great and rapid change. Our models for thinking, our sense of reality, our relationship to our own earth and even the cosmos are all being challenged and transformed. Some have called this period the Great Acceleration or the Anthropocene. And we're having a hard time keeping up with it and reorienting ourselves and reintegrating all of the new things that we're learning and wondering about. As the psalmist laments, how do we sing our song in a strange land? And perhaps some of us are seeking a new song. Perhaps some of us are hoping we can sing a familiar song in a new key. I think that most of us here on Second Saturday no longer find the tenets of classical theology persuasive or meaningful, that Christianity's doctrines and dogmas and set belief systems are no longer meaningful to us. And I would suggest that Christianity is not its doctrines and dogmas, and some may beg to differ with me about that. But my major objection to the doctrines and dogmas and tight belief systems of Christianity is you can't dance to them. I think most of us on Second Saturday are more curious about what was prior to dogma and doctrine, what gave rise to Christianity in the first place, or any of the traditions for that matter. What is it that really stirs us and calls to us?
Now, do you want to read?
That is our ongoing conversation. Our overall theme for this year is skylight and seasoned tongue and groove. It's an image from a poem by Seamus Heaney called The Skylight, and we'll post that poem as one of our closing slides. I mean, there's a time and place for the security of seasoned tongue and groove. And as Heaney describes, that tight lid fit of the ceiling, okay? But it's the skylight, I think, that interests us here. The skylight that opens up a larger world to us, a world of which we are a part, that reveals vistas and horizons and starlight and the changing of seasons, and not close ourselves off, but risk the wild and unknown. Our guest today, and I'll introduce him in a little bit, opens the doors of our perception the way a skylight, as Seamus Heaney puts it, holds surprise wide open. We need to let the outside in and maybe the inside out, and realize that what matters is not dogmatics, but a poetics. Jeff, would you, my friend and colleague, Jeff Creswell, would you orient us to our upcoming plenary time and maybe how to use the raising of the hand and all of that? So,
sure. Good morning, Marianne.
Jeff.
Good to see you as always.
Thanks. You too. Good that we're here.
Welcome, everybody. It's good to see so many folks here with us today to listen to what Belden has to say to us. Just a few things. We use the chat as a place for people to wonder. So if you have a wondering comment, feel free to put that in the chat. But unlike in the early days of Second Saturday, we're not going to be monitoring the chat and looking for questions to raise up during our plenary session, but rather we're going to encourage you, if you have a comment or a question that you'd like to ask of Belden at the end, that you go down to the bottom of your screen where you see reactions as one of the options. And if you click on that, there's an option to raise your hand. If you raise your hand, we'll see a little hand in the corner of your video, and you'll show up there on my screen, and I'll be calling on the people who their hand raised to unmute themselves and ask their question or share their comment. One other thing I'll just say about that is that there are a lot of us here today. We've got almost 300 people who have from all over the world. And in order to give as many people as possible an opportunity to speak, I'm going to encourage you to keep your comment or your question to 2 minutes. And I'll be kind of keeping track of that. And if you hit that 2 minutes, I'll just put up a finger like this. And that'll be my way of gently suggesting that you bring your comment or your question to a close so that we can hear the response and move on to someone else. So thanks, Marianne. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate it. Belden Lane is our guest today, and he is a retired Presbyterian pastor who did his best to redeem Calvin. He does a beautiful job of that, actually, in one of his books, Ravaged by Beauty. He is, I mean, he's Protestant, but he was a professor at a Catholic university. He's a nature mystic. And by that, I mean, he not only talks to trees and lives in them, but he talks to the birds and the coyotes and canyons, and he hears them and they hear him. He's a friend of prophets and a lover of souls. He's a beautiful writer. He's an author. And he's a spiritual guide of landscapes and inscapes. And to borrow a self-description of Walt Whitman's, Belden contains multitudes. I consider Belden and his wife, Patricia, friends. They're kindred spirits. So I am really delighted to have Belden with us today. I was first exposed or introduced to Belden reading his book, The Solace of Fierce Landscapes. I mean, he had me at the title, The Solace of Fierce Landscapes. And Belden helped to deepen my own awareness of desert and mountain spirituality. And he helped me to ponder and really make use of the quote, "Tell me the landscape in which you live, and I will tell you who you are." Belden greatly affected my ability to open myself to the dangerous beauty of the South African bush and to the sacred wilderness of Ring Lake Ranch in the Wind River Range in Wyoming. Belden has also done Christianity a great service in reminding us that Christianity has been deeply committed to nature spirituality, and we have a plethora of nature mystics. I mean, Christianity deserves its bad rap about how it has dealt with the environment. We've had a terrible misunderstanding of that we are to have dominion over the world. Well, a proper understanding of that is no, we're stewards. We're stewards of it, and we've not done a good job. But Belden reminds us that at the heart of the tradition is a love for creation and the natural world. On this propitious day, Belden will stand with us in awe, and he will explore 4 stages in our learning to love the natural world. And I think learning to love the natural world is a mandate right up there with love your neighbor. So without further ado, I want to welcome Belden and to turn our time over to Belden. Belden Lane. Good morning, Belden Lane.
Hi, thank you, Marianne. You're so kind.
Oh,
And I am so honored to
it's a
be.
mirror, Belden. You are so good as well.
Well, it's a wonderful thing to be here on this Lunar New Year, welcoming the Year of the Dragon. I'm intrigued by how the dragon, as a symbol of the power of nature, is so different in Western mythology as compared to Chinese mythology. Our dragons are fierce and threatening. Seen in the untamed chaos of nature. We've needed a St. George to slay the dragon, unfortunately. But in Eastern thought, dragons are beautiful, gentle creatures, divine beings that bring blessing through the gifts of earth, air, fire, and water. Given my work through the years on how nature and spirituality connect, I've been interested in the shift in consciousness that's necessary in moving from a traditional Western posture of hostility and fear to a more winsome appreciation of nature as benevolent and welcoming, even God-filled. How can we move from using the earth in our need to control to loving the earth in our amazement at what it has to teach us? And what are the stages that we go through in moving from the one to the other? Finding God at each step of the way, I think. I'm increasingly hopeful about this shift in consciousness that's already spreading across our culture, slowly but surely. There is a sea change going on in the way we conceive of ourselves and the natural world, and the Holy One as well. Systems theory and advances in plant and animal sciences emphasize how the world is intimately connected. Across the whole fabric of creation, collaboration is at least as important as competition, if not more so. The new tree science tells us how trees thrive in community, connected by underground strands of mycelial fungi. Ecologists show us the importance of top predators like wolves in Yellowstone. They keep the ecosystem in balance. If it weren't for the wolves, an overabundance of elk would eat aspen trees down to their roots, cause riverbanks to erode, and ruin the habitat for fish and beavers. We are learning the stunning interconnectedness of everything in the natural world. And then our nature poets and novelists are awakening us to a new metapoiesis, as you reminded us, a capacity for delighting in what we once had feared. They show us a natural world that's wonderfully wild, but not inherently vicious, at odds with us. We're all interdependent upon each other. We're an amazement of interrelated parts that fit together, energized somehow by a shared consciousness that is moving, Teilhard de Chardin tells us, towards something yet more beautiful and intricate in this wonderful journey of evolution. So our growing awareness of all this is the great turning of our time, says Joanna Macy. We're coming to see the whole universe as alive, everything pulsing with wonder. I think of 3 examples over the last century of people who have discovered this connectedness through their own encounters with something very specific in the natural world. Teilhard de Chardin is playing in his backyard at the age of 7 when he digs up an old iron plow hitch. He's stunned by the weight of it, the captivating thisness of matter itself. He revels in the fact, this 7-year-old, that every created thing shimmers with the presence of God. A future paleontologist and theologian is suddenly born. Or I think of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien strolling one evening under the trees along Addison's Walk in Oxford. They've been talking about the power of myth and story. Lewis is still a convinced agnostic, holding back from any personal commitment to faith. Suddenly, a gust of wind brings falling leaves circling all around them. It's as if the earth itself were inviting Lewis to make the leap from a delight in myth to a trust in God. And he does it. And then there is Rachel Carson in the midst of her research on the disastrous effects of DDT, what resulted in her wonderful book, Silent Spring. She's wading one night through the stunning bioluminescence of sparkling creatures in the surf near her summer home on the Maine coast. She marvels at a firefly attracted to what seem to be other lightning bugs there in the water. But getting too close, the firefly is quickly swept under by a wave. Rachel manages to save it from drowning. And in that moment, she knows there's still hope for a world full of wonder. Aren't these beautiful vignettes? In each case, there's a visceral encounter with a plow hitch, falling leaves, bioluminescent creatures, astounding mysteries that suggest a deeper presence. They awaken a desire for more. They engage the mind, but they also leave it dumbfounded, leading Tellard, Lewis, Carson, and us to speechless awe. May it be that this is where we're headed as a species, standing in awe before a God-filled world. Now, Marianne, I know I'm swimming upstream here in talking about embracing a new consciousness, restoring the great conversation. There are still so many things that keep us stuck in our old ways of thinking. Do you think Bob Dylan was right back when we were going through the 60s, that the times they are changing? Do you see it? Here, these wonderful people, you've got 300 today. On the second Saturdays, do you sense a deep sense of their moving and they're carrying others with them into a new consciousness?
I'm eager to hear them respond to that question. But my sense is, yes, I think the times are changing. I think change is a given. Change is a given. And how we move with that, with so often our need for security or predictability, or and there's a place for that. But as you know, Keats has this category, negative capability, which is our ability to live with ambiguity and the unknown, and let wonder take us where it will, without complaining about it, And my sense is that Second Saturday folks are developing really a pretty high capacity for negative capability, that we can deal with ambiguity, but still, and I love what you said, that there's some deep, there's a deep affirmation amidst it all, that we are here at all.
Yeah.
That we are here at all. And so I'm curious about the consciousness piece, because I think that I'm becoming more of the mind that consciousness is something that evolves and that doesn't come down from above.
Yeah.
And so I hope that as a species that we are evolving, if you will, and that is affecting our consciousness, our awareness. But there's so many things in our world that distract us from paying attention to what is, So, but back to you. Say then a little bit more about consciousness and about that visceral awareness that there's something more going on.
Yeah, I've been in my own experience of this, been aware of my moving through stages that I've been able to identify of this consciousness being dawning in me and in the others. I found myself moving from being a user to becoming an explorer, to dancing as a celebrant, and finally falling head over heels as a lover. These are 4 stages, 4 roles I think we're invited to play as participants in the great conversation: user, explorer, celebrant, and lover. And at our best, of course, we integrate all 4 of them. So the first is our being users of the natural world. We can't avoid this. We are naturally involved in taking, consuming, benefiting from the more than others, more than human beings. We have to stay alive. We use trees in building houses. We extract minerals in building cities. The course of nature is that we all eat and in turn are eaten by others. We take the lives of plants and animals and in the end, hopefully give our own lives back in return. But the problem over our last 400 years or so has been thinking of ourselves as higher intelligent beings surrounded by mere things meant for our disposal, objects to be made use of and then thrown away. This was Aldo Leopold back in 1912 when he shot a gray wolf in the wilds of New Mexico. It changed his life. As he watched a fierce green fire dying in the eyes of that beautiful animal, he witnessed the cost that's involved in all killing, in all using. He went on to develop a land ethic, emphasizing the intertwined relationship of people with the land and its creatures. His story is bothering to me because I grew up in the swampland and scrub pines of Central Florida. I remember as a 10-year-old one day with the boy next door, taking our brand new single shot 22 rifles out into the woods. I shot a squirrel for the first time. And then I realized what I'd done, taking a life. And the only way I could exonerate myself was to eat what I had killed. So we skinned the squirrel as best we could, held it on a stick over a fire we built, and chewed on its tough, half-cooked meat. It was awful. We had wanted to think of our eating as an act of conquest, great hunters in the wild at 10 years of age. But it felt so much more like an act of shame. And yet, I think all of us share in this same ambivalence as we stand before the meat counter or the produce section of the local grocery store. In order to live, we have to eat. But how do we do this without taking for granted the creatures that provide for us? How do we honor the lives of plants and animals we eat, passing on the gift of their lives in the way we give ours? Had a wonderful experience of this years ago when Patricia and I spent a month in a mountain cabin in the Wind River Range of Wyoming that you mentioned. I'll never forget being invited to a meal one night by an old friend living nearby. That year, the mountain lion population had increased in the area, allowing the Game and Fish Department to offer a few tags to hunters. A bow hunter known to a friend of ours had shot a cougar and shared some of its meat with him. So he, in turn, invited us to dinner. I was appalled at the idea of eating such a marvelous creature. But there we were, facing a meal of mountain lion stew. The best we could do was to prepare a ritual for honoring the animal, blessing the territory he had roamed, and asking that his spirit be carried on somehow in us. As an alpha predator in the Rockies, he had held a responsibility for the well-being of everything in the community. We vowed, as best we could, to do the same, hoping that our audacity in eating might be lessened by the awe we felt. Our deepest desire was to become the food we ate.
Mm.
Our deepest desire was to become the food we ate. That was the most powerful experience of Eucharist I've ever had in my life.
Mm. Oh.
So the question is how we can do this with everything.
Oh.
There's a 100-year-old male cottonwood tree who lives in the park across the street from my house. Over the last 30 years, he's been my most important teacher in the natural world. I call him grandfather. Unfortunately, I have to use trees like grandfather in disturbing, if necessary, ways. I write books that are made from wood pulp. Trees are cut down to support my calling as a writer. I hope we're getting over this soon, going to ebooks instead of wood. But this puts grandfather and me now in a morally ambiguous relationship. I'm asking a cottonwood tree who I love to give his life so that I might speak and write on behalf of trees. That's a great irony. And yet, this is the sacramental mystery at the heart of all relationships. I turn trees like grandfather into paper, hoping that what I write may help to turn trees like grandfather into spirit, into a still greater consciousness, a stronger voice for justice in the world, a deeper ability to celebrate life. We all are sacramentally interwoven into each other. I guess the question, Marianne, is how do we remind ourselves regularly of that? Maybe it gives new importance to the old tradition of saying grace at table. Are we too short of rituals in general, especially rituals that honor what we use? As we move deeper into this great conversation, as I've moved into my relationship with grandfather, we enter a second stage of becoming explorers. Not in the sense of Columbus and other Europeans who came to the New World in the 16th century. They were to a large extent colonizers, taking over and commodifying what they discovered. I'm talking about explorers who marvel at what they encounter, coming at it with an immense vulnerability, curiosity, and awe, even playfulness at times. That's what happened years ago when grandfather and I first met. It was a time then of mutual crisis. My mother was in a nursing home dying of cancer. He was dealing with a fierce windstorm that had just blown down one of the two great trunks growing from his roots. This left a 12-foot high wound in his side. That's what first drew me to him. A common hurt was what opened the door between us. In every experience of love, I think, attraction may be initially what pulls us in, but it's shared suffering that cements the relationship. For years now, I've entrusted this tree with the care of my soul. We keep exploring deeper ways of communicating with each other. What that means is that we're increasingly falling in love. I'd never fallen in love with a tree before, but it's been one of the great gifts of my life. Communication in the end is nothing more than learning to love, letting the soft animal of your body love what it loves, as Mary Oliver says so beautifully. The tree and I communicate in a nonverbal, sensuous way. I delight in his smell, for example, as I lean into the cave of his wounded place every morning. It's the musty smell of old furniture, cinnamon bark, wood smoke. It reminds me of my dad's putting me to bed at night as a child, remembering his smell of stale cigarette smoke and Old Spice aftershave. How do we connect, grandfather and I? I lean into his hollow and I give myself to the reverie that trees invite. Within that contemplative state, I sometimes sense a subtle shift in consciousness, a thought or a feeling that arises within me and yet seems to be more than me. You know, I ask, where did that come from? It's nothing I can verify. The mystery of our entire relationship is that nothing happens as such. I hear no voices for sure. I have no identifiable language that the two of us can share, and yet we connect. It is so much like my relationship with God, for that matter.
Yeah.
And as I learn to pay better attention, I also have a sense that the tree has agency. I know that's going to be a stretch for some people. I've noticed this. For example, when I'm companioning someone in spiritual direction, the two of us sitting together at grandfather's feet, and one of us humans may say something deeply moving, coming to the heart of the work at hand, and grandfather will often join in. A wind suddenly shakes his leaves into thunderous applause, as if in response to the insight that came. I know this sounds crazy, but I've seen it happen too many times to think it's a mere coincidence. Whimsically, I even wonder if trees on occasion may conjure up their own wind to emphasize what they're teaching. No, it's crazy, but all love is crazy. Marianne, I think a lot of people have experiences like this, just don't talk about it in public.
Yeah.
We make little connections all the time without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
And so in our plenary time, I'll really be eager to hear if people have stories like this of their own to share. I know it resonates with you.
Yeah, I just really appreciate your emphasis on sort of, the visceral, that, the sensual, that we experience something. I think that, so much of our, all theology is a construction. And I think exactly. And yet it requires imagination. But I think that so much of our theology, as you pointed to, tends to be around what I said earlier, dogmatics, and what do we think? But there's a whole realm of apprehension and awareness that I don't think is esoteric. I think it has something to do with we as human beings, how we apprehend and live and move and have our being in the world. It is sensual. It appeals to our senses. We have these visceral responses to things, something deep in our bowels, which in the biblical tradition is supposed to be the place of compassion. And so I really appreciate your inviting us to take seriously our bodily experience of ourselves and in the natural world, because there's that kind of communication going on. It's a different kind of communication than just than thought. It's like an experience will give rise to a symbol. And I love how you talked about the importance of ritual. I think that's something that we need to refresh, if you will, in our own liturgical lives. But that experience will give rise to a symbol. This is very much Paul Ricoeur, and that symbol then is what will give rise to thought. But it's in that order. And we tend to go thought, and then hoping that it'll bring us back down to an experience. And I think sometimes it can, but sometimes it's too detached from that. So if I'm understanding you right, I think that you're inviting us to sense the world anew and take that seriously as a kind of not only communication, but a kind of awareness of a connectedness that changes then the way that we see ourselves within it.
And as you said earlier, the real test of anything that we believe is whether we can dance it.
Yeah, right.
I love it.
Right. If it don't have no swing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I got to tell you a story. about how the natural world sneaks up on us at times, even when we're resistant to it. There was a student I had in a course I was teaching years ago on nature and theology. We were taking part in a micro hike. And what that involves is each person having a tent stake with a 15-inch length of string tied to the top of it. And the plan is to go outside the classroom building onto the grass and to put your tent stake in the ground somewhere. And for the next 45 minutes, do nothing but study the 15-inch radius of that circle of earth, getting down on your stomach so you can see closely. It's amazing some of the things that you find there. Well, this student thought this was the stupidest thing he'd ever heard of. So he put his tent stake in a patch of dead grass somewhere and lay down on his stomach to go to sleep for the next 45 minutes. Just as he was dozing off, though, he later told me, he saw a spider crawling up onto the top of his tent stake. The spider looked around and then at one point shot a length of web out of her rear end, out of the spinneret, and pulled it back in. He was amazed. He'd never seen a spider practicing at web spinning. And then he noticed as the spider took its time, looking around, he's there on the ground with his hands like this, and the spider shoots out a length of web to his hand and starts to walk across the web to his hand. He's utterly astonished at this. And then she takes her time, she's looking around, and then she shoots a length of web up to his forehead and starts to walk up that as well. Well, by this time, he's noticing that people around him are getting up. We're going back to the classroom to talk about it. He is so torn. He doesn't want to leave this great mystery he's a part of, but at the same time, he can't wait to share it with somebody else. So he carefully disconnects the spider and the web from his forehead and his hand, and he comes running up to me, ecstatic at the idea that he had, for the first time in his life, seen a spider spin its web, and he'd been still enough for it to spin its web on him.
Oh, nice.
This can happen to us as well. The others out there often come to us out of their own curiosity and vulnerability and playfulness. If we just stay awake, we might be more surprised than we ever imagined. At my feet here is my dog, Joey. I think one
My
of
left
the...
hand is my dog, Theo.
Oh, really? Oh, wonderful. We have our dogs together. I think household pets are one of the most normal ways that we have of connecting with others out there. I know dogs have been important for you and Marcus for years. Joy came to us just a week after our son John died 3 years ago. He's stolen my heart, as golden retrievers always do, and helped me grieve the loss of our child, connecting me to the others, to recognize that grandfather and spiders, rivers, the vast, wide family out there is all open to delight and grief and all the things we share or have to share.
Yeah. As you mentioned earlier, that we have a way of connecting through our suffering,
Yeah.
Through probably our intuitive sense of limit
Mhm.
and mortality, even though we fight against that. We're always pushing the limits, and
Mhm.
we have wonderment about immortality. But I think on some deep level, I mean, this can be argued, but on some deep level, I think that our awareness of mortality it becomes part of our suffering, but maybe it doesn't need to. The things that, I mean, pain and suffering is something that requires our response, but I think that knowing the mix of our courage and our fragility. There's just something very poignant about that in our
Yeah.
experience as human beings, I think.
All of this makes sense when Joy is, we're sitting together on an old sofa with his head in my lap. He's getting to be an old boy, turning white as I am. And I know that our mortality is a reality for both of us. And yet together, across different species, somehow there is an acceptance that I know comes from me, mediated somehow by him.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and I wonder if we have not a lot to learn from the natural world and the animal world about the acceptance,
It's a part of living. Death is, yeah.
living and dying.
Yeah.
It's to accept that as the Buddhists say, nothing is permanent.
Yeah.
And that's not a betrayal. I think
Yes.
we tend to
No,
experience
no.
that as a betrayal. But
It
that
makes everything alive.
everything is, yes. And the life cycles. And I think that my experience with our dogs too has been that when that time comes, they accept it.
Yeah. Yeah. So a third stage in our growth into this mystery involves our becoming active celebrants of the world and the God who dances within it, exulting together in the wonder of being alive. What happens as we pay careful attention to the mystery of trees and spiders is that I think we are mutually awakened to something within and beyond us. We all, across species, spontaneously break into praise, giving glory to God. There's suddenly an experience, a mushrooming sense of community. I sense this often out in wilderness when I'm backpacking, as if the entire world on a almost spring day we had yesterday here, the entire world were created for the single purpose of celebration. It's how certainly creation is understood in the biblical tradition. And I'm in awe of people throughout the history of spirituality who've been overwhelmed by experiences like this. I get goosebumps thinking of Hildegard of Bingen, the Benedictine nun who perceived an unknown language and unheard music coming from trees and shrubs around her monastery on the Rhine. She exulted in everything green, responding to these others with an amazing music of her own. Francis of Assisi, of course, was so swept away by this deepened sense of an earth community that he naturally spoke of earth, fire, water, and sky as brothers and sisters, giving praise together. I love the story of the Prophet Muhammad standing one day next to a date palm tree in the desert as he preached about the glory of Allah. The tree burst into tears on hearing his words. Both of them, tree and man, astounded at having crossed species boundaries in sharing a common sense of wonder. And then there's the Baal Shem Tov, that 18th century Hasidic Rebbe, who's said to have spoken 26 different languages, not just Yiddish and Polish, Hebrew, but the tongues of birds, trees, animals, plants, and clouds. He regularly joined each of them praying together in their own languages. I love it. So people like this are aware that praise is an interspecies reality. You find it throughout the Bible. The book of Revelation speaks of every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea, and all that is in them singing praise, honor, glory, and power to the Lamb. The psalmist exhorts fruit trees and all cedars to praise the Lord, along with wild animals and flying birds. Isaiah speaks of the mountains and hills bursting into song, everything celebrating the Creator and the works of God's hands. This is more than poetry. It's more than metaphor. It's a recognition of a world that is alive, spoken by people of a deep agrarian consciousness. So I mentioned too, the importance of ritual. This notion of praise as a ritual act shared by humans and the earth alike is fascinating to me. It's as if the act of praise has physical properties. It helps to generate the reality it celebrates. The words we utter in prayer have a way of making real what they name. That's a stunning idea. Old Testament theologian Walter Brueggemann emphasizes this generative power of liturgical praise in the Psalms. It's a world-making event, he says. The ritual not only declares God to be God, but calls into being the world God requires. The world is remade, in other words, each time the liturgy is reenacted. Psalm 104, for example, is a liturgical reenactment of Genesis 1. Through its ritual performance of praise, the world is reconstituted anew, called into being once again. That's the potential power of celebration, and our role as celebrants within it. And Brueggemann says the same thing is true of lament. In the Hebrew scriptures. To celebrate is not only to honor all that is good, but also to call attention to what is not being honored. The cry of those who suffer, both human and more than human, is itself generative, especially uttered in a ritual setting. It has a world dismantling quality that challenges the structures of power. Isaiah says that along with the poor who work the land, the earth itself mourns and withers, the world languishes, lying polluted under its inhabitants. How long must the land cry out in mourning, asks Jeremiah. These cries uttered in prayer are powerful. They affect change, pointing out what's not being celebrated but should be. So consequently, and I love this, Brueggemann adds that they can be socially and politically dangerous. The venting of pain always makes room for bold acts of faith, calling for radical change. That's why Pharaoh disallowed the public expression of lament. He knew there can be trouble, John Lewis's kind of trouble, when the poor's cry of suffering is heard in the land. So if we can think of celebration as involving both praise and lament, exulting in the dignity of creation and deploring its being stripped of dignity, we become active and world-changing celebrants of life, joined in a common longing with the whole of creation, set free to practice an exuberant joy and a gritty compassion. I love what Stephen Jay Gould once said, "We won't fight to save what we haven't learned to love. We won't really act on what we haven't learned to deeply celebrate." This idea that liturgy is generative is fascinating to me. I remember my first time at Portland's Trinity Cathedral with you there. You were singing the sung Eucharist, and it was not only something beautiful, there was something magical about it. So much more than just you. An awareness that praise was being gathered and concentrated and making a difference in the reality that we all experienced. I know you've sensed that often in liturgy at its best. It is transformative.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, and I'm really struck with your sense about that language can be performative.
Yeah.
I mean, it not only participates in something that already is, but it generates as well. So
And all kinds of languages are performative.
yes,
all the others as well.
Nicely put. Yeah, all kinds of languages. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I'm becoming more curious about theopoetics, and that word poetic, meaning, or from the word poiesis, to make, to create, or to bring something into being that wasn't before, or whatever. So what I hear you describing is that in celebrating life, all of it, that not only are we participating in it in a sense with a kind of abandon, but that there's something about participating in the realities of life that also generates.
Mm, mm. Yeah,
And I'm really curious about that. So in
yeah,
a sense, you know, we become creator.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
We participate in creativity, and then we become creator as well. And that has lots of implications.
We become what we eat in the Eucharist. We eat the body of Christ. We become the body of Christ.
Yeah, yeah. And what does that really mean for us?
Yeah, yeah.
Take and eat, lest the journey be too great, you know. But you know what, and the richness of language and the richness of metaphorical language and symbol and ritual, that all of this is part of the language of being a human being. And I think we need to pay more attention, recover the vitality and disclosures of that. And what I sense is that you are inviting us to have the natural world quicken that in us,
Yes.
because the natural world actually naturally participates
Mhm.
in the reality and mystery of life and death, and life and death, and limit and possibility, and that we're part of that.
Yeah.
And is there something we can learn from the natural world that might touch us in a very deep, visceral, sensual way, because it's part of our identity as well? I mean, am I getting that sort of
Yes.
right?
And what it leads you to finally is to falling in love
Yeah.
more deeply with God and with the world around us.
To celebrate that we're part of that at all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So in this fourth stage of becoming a lover,
Mm.
I've been so honored in my life to have loved and been loved by a tree grandfather. Over the years, we've become comfortable with each other, praying and aging together like an old couple. You can call this all my imagination, but Ignatius Loyola would say, what's any better way we have of connecting with God than through our imagination?
I have a high value for imagination.
Yes, absolutely. And yet grandfather always remains a mystery to me, more than I'm able to comprehend. The otherness that we encounter in touching each other makes us more aware of the otherness of God that we move into as well. To love someone is to move ever more deeply into the mystery of their otherness. And so for the three of us, grandfather, myself, and God, mystery and love just feed each other, it seems.
Mm.
Gregory of Nyssa, the 4th century theologian, said that God is ultimately beyond knowing,
Mm.
but
Mm.
not beyond loving.
Mm.
For him, the spiritual life is a matter of continually moving into an ever greater desire, learning that there's always more to love. He knew that when we take the risk of loving anything, we move further into what remains an ultimate mystery. That's why loving God's creatures is a practice in loving God as well. One of my most vivid experiences with grandfather happened on an April night, almost 10 years ago now. For a long time, I had been wanting to climb the tree and spend the night in his branches. And I finally found a tree climbing teacher who could assist me in roping my way up into the arms of that tall cottonwood tree. He's about 90 feet tall. And I was thoroughly exhausted, feeling fully my age, by the time I made it to the top, where I slept in a hammock slung from his high branches. It was a literal experience of transcendence, lying suspended between earth and sky in a liminal space betwixt and between. What do you do on a spring night when you're strung between the earth and a full moon, no less, the one yearning for the other? With new life pulsing everywhere around you, grandfather's red catkins at the time had just blossomed, and he was pumping out pollen carried by the wind to the green catkins of female trees nearby. Everything was falling in love all over again. Through the night, in and out of sleep, I experienced a crossing over of flesh and bark, human and arboreal consciousness. My interfering mind disappeared, as it were, for a few moments. I entered into the tree's memory of days full of sparkling sunshine and deep soaking rain. I shared in his having known the terror of high winds and lightning, of fire and ice, insects and disease. I was carried back millions of years ago to a time when species like mine spent much of their lives in the tops of trees, leaping through high branches and with careful abandon. I realized through the night, this is one of the great gifts of my life, that I was becoming the very one I'd been learning to love in this strange relationship. I didn't know where the tree stopped and I began. I didn't know where God stopped and the two of us began. Waking up the next morning, I knew I'd been part of something magical, a sacramental mystery. Thinking back on that experience, I know I had entered into the membership that Wendell Berry speaks of in his novels. He creates a fictional town of Port William, Kentucky, full of fascinating characters. The whole community there is bound by ties that run deep in the earth. To be part of its membership is to know that you're inseparably connected to everyone and everything else. It's the truest sense of belonging that one can have in this world. Berry's membership includes the draft horses and river traffic, the town barber and kids swinging from oak trees down the hill, insects flying among the flowers, and even bacteria in the compost pile. Everything belongs. We're all members of each other, says Berry. The difference ain't in knowing who's a member and who's not, but in who knows it and who don't. There's no us and them. We're all one.
I think that's what Whitman means when he says, I contain multitudes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That night, as I lay in the hammock in that tree, overlooking my own familiar neighborhood, I knew I was part of it in a new way, too. I was the creek running on the other side of the field. I was one of the old guys drinking beer in the park every night. I was one of the kids playing kickball, one of the marchers in the Pride Parade going nearby. I was inseparably a part of the racial tension and occasional outbreaks of violence, the 4th of July celebrations and protest rallies. The beauty and the pain of it all were mine. And I sense as an old man now, I'm 80 years old. I don't know how that happened, but I've been moving all along into a process, we all are, moving into a process of becoming everything. An inseparable part of the membership held together by God's astounding presence. We all are multitudes. I have been blessed in ways beyond knowing. My life, like all of our lives, is a Eucharist, a great Thanksgiving.
I love what you said, that I've been blessed in ways beyond knowing.
Yes.
Mm.
So I want to close with a story, one that you and I remember from last August at Ring Lake Ranch when a bunch of us were there for a week-long retreat. During the week, we realized how many of us had lost adult children in the last few years and other loved ones. Down by the lake one morning, we dedicated a bench to the memory of a lovely young woman named Bee, who had died recently. I couldn't help but think of our son, John, who had died 3 years earlier. And at one point, we were invited to toss a stone into the lake and to speak whatever might come from the heart. And as I started to throw my stone into the water when it was my turn, a fierce wind suddenly came rushing across the lake right at us, driving me to my knees. And I felt welling up within me a profound sense of longing for all the lost children everywhere. And I yelled out as loudly as I could, I love you, John and Bee. May you dance together. And I swear within seconds, as you know, a lone osprey came flying across the lake overhead, began moving in circles above us, calling as it flew. And before long, another osprey came and joined it, the two of them circling above us, as if the universe itself were calling attention to a love that transcends every boundary of species, every family connection, making us aware of a membership that can never be lost. May it be so. In the end, it is all about love, isn't it? Amen.
Yeah, I was a witness to what Belden just described, and it was remarkable that, in a sense, your own soul was wrenched open, and it was almost as though the lake and the wind and the osprey met you there. And talking about it being palpable and visceral and in a sense, I mean, it was unitive. And yes, it was very powerful. It was a remarkable moment. And and do we not wonder if there are moments like that that we do not always notice?
You don't need very many to get you through.
Agreed. That's yeah, agreed. And having an experience like that, it changes everything, doesn't it? About our sense of our relationship to the natural world, the living world, to what it is to be in the living world. We really are a part of it, aren't we?
We are.
Hmm.
Thank you, Marianne.
Oh, Belden. Yes, so much more to be explored here. There are so many themes that you have touched upon, from narrative and language and symbol and ritual and discovery and gift and risk, and the wildness and the wet of it all, so much more to explore. And I think that our getting more in touch with this is perhaps just the kind of fluid that Christianity needs to come alive to us again.
Absolutely.
So lots to explore. I noticed that we have a number of people already wanting to participate in this conversation. So I often read some guidelines for listening and talking, but this group knows those guidelines well. It's a kind of hospitality for how to listen and talk. But I will keep that on the side for now, and just I'd like to move right into having people share with you their own experience and their response to you. So Jeff, can you help us with that?
Sure. Thank you, Marianne, and thank you, Belden. I think I am so moved by what you shared, because I, like you, believe that we all have these experiences and we don't talk about them. And the fact that we don't talk about them is to our peril.
Yes.
And the world that we're living in now is so polarized. that we stuff these sacred experiences deep within ourselves because we don't feel safe enough to let them out. And yet that's exactly what we need to be doing more of. And it feels like you are inviting us all into that community and to realize that we know each other through these stories. We know our connectedness through these stories, and we know our place in the community of the world that we live through these stories. And it's just such a gift that you've shared yours. Thank you.
To move beyond our self-consciousness into the gift of the holy fool.
Yeah.
Is a great invitation coming to us from the early desert fathers and mothers. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I love your talk about grandfather, because I would dare to say that more of us than not have a tree like grandfather, but we'd never talk about it because it seems foolish or stupid.
Right.
And we discount it by saying that before we share it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of sharing it as a normal part of life.
Yeah.
So thank you for opening that.
Thank you.
One other thing I'd like to say to people, just quick reminder, the 2-minute warning will be the little finger. And secondly, if you go to the upper right-hand corner of your video screen, you have an opportunity to rename yourself. If your name is not what is on your video, it's helpful that I don't have to call out Western Presbyterian instead of a name. That's what's on the video. So if your name is not there, if you'd put it there, that would be helpful. But let's start with John James. John, you have your hand up. Would you unmute yourself? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. My heart was going fast through your whole talk, Belden. You just poured out so much that matters to me. 20 years ago, 21 now, I lost a son, and his name was John. And that turned my whole theology around, and it taught me about what true love is. It's not a club you want to be in. But anyway, my response is to minister to others that have lost children, especially adult children. And so, to the extent I can, I give you a hug. That's one of the first things I do. Now, I want to go back to early part of your talk when you talked about relationships with nature. My first passion in science, I'm a scientist and a mystic, was astronomy. And so I love the night. And I live in Houston, and I curse the street lights and all the other lights. But I want to say something about dark. If you are blessed to find a dark place to be, look up at the sky and don't just look at the silly patterns. Think of the depth of the sky. The moon is only 250,000 miles away, but if you have some good binoculars, you can see the Andromeda galaxy, which is trillions of miles away, further than we can even imagine. My wall is plastered with astronomy posters. One shows thousands of galaxies in one place. It is humbling to think about what's out there in the night. Now, having said that, I have some memories of walking in the night by a woods. One is of a coyote that followed my dog and me as if it wanted a relationship. Neither my dog nor I wanted that relationship. The coyote ran off. Another one is skunks that run around at night. And I've gotten frighteningly close to a skunk before I realized what I'd almost come upon. So the night has blessings, it has challenges, it has wonder. And I think back to what Carl Sagan said, we are a pale blue dot. We are just a tiny, tiny dot in the universe. And now the latest findings are there are billions of planets in our galaxy that are very much like ours. How many other forms of life are out there that we can't even imagine? So if you're blessed to see the dark of a night, look at the sky. this is a beautiful time of year to do that. There's a lot up there.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Wonderful,
Thank you,
wonderful.
John.
Thank you.
Okay, how about Cheryl McGinnis? Would you unmute yourself, please?
Hi, thank you.
Cheryl.
Marianne, I wanted to thank you for the guidelines you've always done, because especially today, Belden, those last things that are asked of us as we listen allowed me to really get into what you were saying. And I'm not sure, if I hadn't heard it for the last 5 years, that if I wouldn't have been able to do it. John, who was just on, I am too a science teacher, and middle school, which I just love teaching, and talk about an adventure. But my earth science, my very first day, the things I say to him, I says, my goal is that when you wake up in the morning and you open those beautiful young eyes, everything will tell you a story. And so, you know, the wind, the feeling, the crunch, whatever it is, the way the wind blows, the clouds, you know, how you're feeling, you can feel the pressure. This whole thing was, and luckily I was right next to the art teacher. And so I taught my science from an art literature perspective, you know, and telling stories. The second thing is trees. I have 2 birch trees out front that I talk to, and there's a huge ponderosa. I'm in Central Oregon, the same as Marianne. And Marianne, we all also haunted the same neighborhood in the Pearl, and met Marcus and your Glenn
And Henry.
dog,
And
and
Henry.
Henry. Yeah, Jameson. Anyway,
I don't know who was more famous, Marcus or Henry in the Pearl.
Henry was a dear. I had my Albanian backhoe dog because he likes to dig with me. So Muggsy and Henry. Anyway, every night I'd walk up North Park blocks. It's a stretch of a park that goes through Portland on the north and then continues through the south. And these big, beautiful trees that are just wonderful. And that's where I'd walk at night and kind of, you know, deconstruct what went on during the day. And there was this thing tacked on one of them, and I went up to it, and it had me in tears. It was the town arborist, the city arborist, saying we're going to have to remove this wonderful tree because its life is ending, and all kinds of stuff. But it was poetic. And I just loved that tree. And I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. I just stood there, and it was just wonderful. And then a little farther down south in the park, there's a playground, and next to it is a bench, and next to that is a tree, which was my let things be tree. When I got to the end, I'd sit down and kind of half lean against the tree and let what was going on. But anyway, I love what you're saying. I too am a nature mystic, and the ground talks to me the same thing. So thank you. It's good to hear the story as someone says we should be telling these stories. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that your town arborist who puts a note on a tree to invite the grief of people who've loved it before they take it down. Yeah. Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah.
And Cheryl, maybe these stories is what'll save us.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Jim, hi. Jim, do you want to unmute? Hi, Jim. There we go.
Good morning.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, Jim.
I have 3 quick things. I love this program today. I talked to my plants and trees and all that. I loved it. But I have 3 quick things. When I was young and in school, we taught civics, and we so badly need to teach it again. And we don't need to teach it really as civics. I think we need to teach it as the history of government, and take all the governments in the world and teach it to young people growing up. Number 2 thing, we need to teach evolution in the school systems. We need to let people know how we got here as a human race, and how we are connected to everything that's alive on this earth.
Mm.
And the last thing we need to do is somebody has got to write a new book that we can put on the altar in place of the Bible. Because the trouble is, everything we try to change, people throw up the Bible and say, oh, no, you can't do it because of that. That's why they won't let us teach evolution in the schools. But that book was written thousands of years ago. Let's write one now, and we could do a better job of it. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Jim.
Get busy, Jim.
Yeah.
I'm a pretty blunt person, if y'all had found out.
Marianne, I love all the crazies that you attract here.
These are my people.
Yes,
They
and
I love them. I show up for them. They've made all of this worthwhile. And I'm
Yeah.
glad to know they're there. Oh my God. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks. Lee, do you want to unmute?
Yes, I have. Belden, I'm so thrilled to have this time with you. I've used your book in my women's group. We read it over a whole year together, faithfully, this conversation. I am part of a worship team for a small church in Wilsonville, Oregon. And we want to plan a service for the people who check none on religious surveys. And so I would like your advice and thoughts about what you would put in that kind of a service.
I'd invite him outside. Part of our problem historically is that we've thought worship can only happen within walls. And Christians are very committed to walls. So the nuns aren't resistant inherently to wonder and even the possibility of, I don't like the word supernatural, but that would just super within the natural. And just to invite them outside into time for silence, time for deep sharing, time for some kind of conversation, ritual that occasions conversation with the others that are more than us. I think this would take you a long ways in connecting with, what is it, a third now of the American population that identify themselves as nuns.
Yeah.
Yeah. But bless you.
Thank you.
I delight in your reaching out to them and also to know that they aren't others, or they are others that we want to invite, that recognize they're just like us. And there's a tendency among Christians, I think, to, oh, those nuns, they're different and they just don't like what the rest of us like. So your openness, absolutely, is wonderful.
Yeah, the nuns are not all culture despisers.
Right, exactly.
Right. Thank you,
Orly.
Yeah. Marianne Mead.
Yes, good afternoon. Yes, I enjoyed what you were saying, but I asked myself quite a few questions about how we actually put some of it in practice. I'm quite a fan of Albert Schweitzer, and I'm doing a talk. I'm preparing a talk about him for the moment. And one of the things that I haven't looked at, the medical bits and all the rest of it, but one of the things that I've asked myself when you were talking is Schweitzer and his principle of reverence for life, put it into practice in such a way that he actually left Alsace and went to the Gabon, and there lived the most simple life you could. There was no electricity, there was no, or at least not in the beginning, there were no toilets, there was no, whatever. But when we look at nature today, I'm sure David Attenborough's programs have reached the United States, have reached everywhere else. But when you look at how these programs are made, what is the carbon footprint that is used to actually put these beautiful programs together, gorgeous, but actually there is the other side of the coin. And then I'm asking myself as well, what are we prepared to give up for the world to exist? What are we prepared to give up for others to live a life that is worth living? And I mean, in the UK here, in the United States, everywhere else in the Western world, industrialized countries, we live on the back of something else. So what are we prepared to do? And, you know, I mean, I'm not a poet as such. So when you talk about the trees and the communication with the trees and the relationship with the tree, I'm asking myself, what does the tree get out of it? You know what you get out of the tree, but what does the tree? And we have no idea. And when you suspend it up in the air, you know, balancing yourself on a hammock, is there a danger for the tree, you know, of a branch? Thank you, of a branch breaking. And there is I'm sure you've heard of the tree in Adrian's Wall that's been cut, 300. I mean, shame. But what is the other side?
These are wonderful questions you raise, Marianne. What does grandfather get out of our relationship? In the past, I have done rituals with him involving hammering fertilizer stakes in a circle around the drip line of the tree and pausing at the different directions to invite the directions of the earth in. So I have literally fertilized him. I don't know how much he needs that or profits from it. I do have, and as I said, any more than I can prove, there is a God that receives my prayers and anger and love. I'm not able to prove that grandfather responds, but there's something, that word visceral, that is deep within me, that is touched by me as I touch him in his wounded place, that I cannot but say is responding, his loving me back. And I love what you said about Schweitzer, that some people are called to a monastic kind of life. The story of my pelican.
I've only just found it. I'd never heard of it before. But it's
I,
one of his pelicans.
yeah, I didn't know of his love of pelicans.
Now, did you know?
Yeah. Even as the monastic movement with the Desert Fathers and Mothers in the 4th century and on, it was a kind of prophetic lifestyle, inviting the rest of us to think about what needs to be changed and what's important and not important in our mainstream culture. And so not all of us are invited to live out in utter simplicity, but the ones that do are a great source of instruction for the rest of us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you, Marianne, and go well with your talk. I'm just
Yes.
I'm
Well,
happy about that.
After the Marcus conference on Schweitzer, there is something on YouTube because he did a conference without, but it's such a vast topic, but it's very
Yes.
interesting. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes, but good to see you, Marianne.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Linda Ashton, can you unmute?
Yes, when Marianne said that you talk to trees, that was just the invitation for me to share. Years ago, I was feeling kind of grumpy as I walked through the house, and I looked out the kitchen window, and there was just this most beautiful red cardinal. And I stopped in my tracks. I took a really deep breath and said, thank you. And so I found myself listening for the cardinals to sing, and I'd thank them in the backyard and in the front yard when I'd go outside and hear them in the neighborhood or in our trees. I'd talk to them as well. And then another incident with a Oh, let me go back just a second. I don't mind talking to friends about my experiences. I think that, hopefully that connects them to something that's important to them. But the amount of feedback that I have had, Linda, I saw a cardinal. It's delightful, absolutely delightful. And then another time, had taken my kitty cat in because she was ill and she didn't make it through the weekend. And I was just so distraught. What did I do? What didn't I do? So I was sitting outside on a swing. And as I swung back and forth, there was a mama cardinal that flew from the fence to a chair, from the fence to a chair. And I haven't tried to figure out what was happening. Again, I just say, thank you. And then the third one, my daughter, young daughter at the time, said, Mom, I want to know more about God, but I don't want to talk to birds. That's the story.
And you're sticking to it.
Oh, I remind myself all the time because it is just so centering. I mean, it's just so real.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah. I
Thank
love that.
you,
It's so
Linda.
real. Yeah.
You know, that you're asking yourself, how do you interpret that experience of the cardinal flying over to the chair and then back to the tree
Yeah. Yeah.
at this time of your grieving? I think that invitation to allow yourself a hermeneutics not of suspicion, but a hermeneutics of delight. To say, yes, that bird may be recognizing something deeply moving in me and wants to get closer.
Mm.
I think that's being open to that is beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you. Marianne, sadly, I think we're out of time, but we will have the coffee 15 minutes afterwards. And I want to give you a chance to close. But clearly, Belden, you've struck a chord. The hands keep going up. And lots of people have something they want to share from this community. So thank you again.
Thank
And
you.
I hope that some of you who have your hands up can join us for coffee time, and we'll extend the conversation a bit. Yeah, I hope you can do that. So yeah, a quick, a brief close. Our next second Saturday will be March 9th, and we'll be in the season of Lent. Anyway, join us on March 9th. I want to let you know what our closing music is for today. I chose it. It's the music from a film called Fantastic Fungi. And it's about the mycelial kingdom. Okay, it's about just the remarkable world beneath our feet. And the closing music title is called Live Again. And one of the opening lyrics is, there's a whole wide world right under our feet, from the ground, a magical thing. We're connected everywhere to everything. It goes on to say, breathe life, break down, breathe in, break out. Let me bring you back to life again. And this is actually water talking to the mycelial kingdom, but let me bring you back to life again. And I think that Belden is inviting us to realize that the natural world can bring us back to life again, if only we will do the same. So Belden, as we depart today in the tradition of the Desert Mothers and Fathers, oh Abba, give us a word to live by.
You know, there's a wonderful story of some theologians who went into the desert one time to see Abba Anthony the Great, the first of the Desert Fathers. And they saw how simple he lived. And they said, how can you live a spiritual life out here without any holy books? And Anthony said, my book is the nature of created things. Whenever I want to read the Word of God, it's always right here before me.
Mhm.
So the Word of God, anchored in the very landscape, is what I invite us and challenge us to explore and to love. Amen.
Amen. May it be so.
May it be so.
Belden, thank you so much. It's really been an honor and a pleasure to have you with us today.